looks like the volume's going on there, everything. Alright, hello everybody, welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon. Today is Intro to Photography. We're going to get started right now. We'll pull up the presentation. So, in today's class, really what we're focusing on is moving away from our smartphone and getting into something a little more advanced. And for some of us, that could be a mirrorless, a DSLR, that could be a point-and-shoot camera. If you're looking at something maybe like a GoPro or a smaller action-based camera, that's not until the end of the month where we talk about beyond the traditional cameras. But at least for right now, let me get rid of this mute button on there. I need to, okay. That was driving me nuts. But yeah, regardless, we're really looking to graduate. And so why we want to maybe move past our phones or move past kind of the introductory cameras that we might have is to get better images. That's the whole point in doing this. It's to either capture something, whether that be, if we have kids or younger ones that we want to get pictures of, build memories of, or family or friends. Maybe we're vacationing a bunch and we want to take pictures, or maybe we've just had this on the shelf for years and we don't know what to do with it, and so we want to pick up the pace a little bit. There's total different reasons. So in today's class, the major things we're going to go over, we start with SD cards, saving images. I think that's one of the most important things. I've had customers, friends, just people in general who will take pictures and they're like, nothing saved. And so I think it's important to talk about that. Then we'll get into the layout of the camera. We'll talk a little bit about the anatomy of everything. One thing I will say is that cameras have changed a lot from DSLR to mirrorless, and so buttons and layouts, when you look at something like, you guys have a DSLR over there, you've got a Sony on your neck, so I know that that's going to be mirrorless. Lumix is an all-in-one camera, but it's still a mirrorless camera technically, and then I believe you both have DSLRs from what I'm seeing here. So everybody's in the same kind of family, everything's a little different. Sometimes buttons don't exist on the physical camera anymore, it's in the menu system. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then we end the class talking about what makes a good photo and just kind of some tips and tricks that I learned when I was still studying photography and kind of what you could look at. Next week is intermediate camera, and then we get into advanced and then beyond the traditional camera the later week. So let's get jumping in and started. And again, any point, interrupt, ask any questions you got. So, where to go when all else fails or when you need help. I'm a resource. I'm here every day except for Tuesdays and Wednesdays, so I always recommend if you need to or want to, come on in, bother me anytime. I'll help you with whatever you got. If you grab one of my cards before you leave too, you can email me stuff as well. I always respond to emails quickly. But first and foremost, read the owner's manual. I know it's silly. They're usually like this thick. It's like a little novel, but there's a lot of stuff in there. It might help you too if you're like, what does this button do? They'll tell you the shape and what the button actually means and the different functions that it has. So I always start with that. If you are really into photography, you're really into cameras in general, Imaging Resource is fantastic. I got turned on to that by a customer. And they actually have a podcast too. Very nerdy stuff, very technical, very spec and detail oriented. It's probably not anything you might want to interest yourself in, but the Imaging Resource is more of a blog itself. And the cool part about that is, let's say that you have a question in general, you can post something on there and you'll get hundreds of answers, usually within a couple days, which is really great. But a lot of the times, things that you're struggling with, others have already struggled with. So Canon, Nikon, Sony all have fantastic websites with dedicated resources to each brand. The thing I love about Nikon's website in particular is that they have a really nice interactive website where they'll explain focal length, aperture, f-stop, everything between ISO 2, and then they really go into detail with what their product lineup holds. But Canon has something similar, Sony, so you'll find tons of different stuff there. And my personal all-time favorite is YouTube. I have remodeled things in my house thanks to YouTube. There is an answer always there. One of the things I tell customers who are brand new to this, if you type your camera model in and you look up 10 things you didn't know about, the Lumix or whatever model of camera you have in particular, there will be probably 50 to 60 videos that break down just everything about that camera. So good idea to look into too, especially if you want to maybe look in settings that you should switch or do, so not a bad idea. So where do your pictures go? Let's make sure you have 2 of them. To start, first and foremost, SD cards are what we're looking at. All the cameras you guys have today are utilizing an SD card. in SD. For older cameras, so let's say back in like early 2000s, even in the DSLR times, they were using what was called an SDHC, which is just a slower form of SD card. If you still have one of those cards, I would probably recommend to upgrade to the newer ones, which you'll see are SDXC. All that is for video. SDHC don't take in video that well and they're a little bit slower. SDXC take in video much faster and they process information better. Not necessary if you're not concerned about video, so don't worry about that. But if you do eventually upgrade and get maybe more of a high-powered camera, something with a high megapixel count, or anything like that jazz, then you probably still want to do an SDXC. It's a faster card overall. Secondly, most cards back in the day only offered maybe 32 at the highest and usually 8 or 4 gigabytes at the lowest. Nowadays that is extremely low. So my recommendation to anybody who's getting started into this, 64 should be your minimum. If you are planning on doing video, it would not hurt to look into a 128 gigabyte one. And then lastly, the other thing I would look at is the speed of which that card is operating. Most of these cards somewhere on there will give you a speed of some sort. Some don't, but you most likely will see an R and W written on there. One is for read, one is for write. Your camera is reading the information, and then that's how the card is processing and understanding what the camera is getting. The write speed is the speed at which it's writing that all onto the card to save that information. The faster that read and write speed are, the better off you are for things like high burst shooting, video, slow motion, anything that's, let's say, beyond your standard photo that you're taking is what that's going to be beneficial for. If you're just taking standard photos and all of this seems like it's over your head, SDHC is totally fine. It's not going to hinder you at all, at least for entry level, and it's a good way to get started with it. I still do recommend getting a 64 or higher. You know, if you're shooting something that is, let's say, industry standards around 24 megapixels, most of the cameras you guys brought in, I'd say, are anywhere between about 16 all the way up to that 24 mark for megapixels. You're probably looking anywhere, if you have a 64 gigabyte, at 24,000 to, let's say, 18,000 photos in one go. However, I mean, unless you're going on 5 to 6 vacations and you're taking 4,000 or 5,000 photos each time, you probably won't fill it up that quickly. But the one thing I do always recommend is to have 2 of these. If you take your SD card out of your camera, you'll notice on the very back of the card that it's tiny little copper strips that are the connection point. After a certain period of time of you inserting and taking that thing out and having the card or camera read it, they get worn out. And so eventually what will happen is you'll go to shoot and you'll put the card in the camera, or you'll turn the camera on and it'll say it's unable to save or unable to read the SD card. And if you don't have another card with you, you're not getting anything for the day. So keep 2 with you. If you've got a camera bag, it's easy to slip one in there. Most of the time when you buy a card, it'll come with a little plastic case for it. Keep the case with it too. It's not a bad idea. But there's 2 things I always think you should have doubles of. That's 2 batteries and two SD cards at all times. If you forget to charge a camera battery, or if, let's say, you're in extreme heat or extreme cold, the camera battery over time can die out on you. So having a second one's not a bad idea, and in case one of these fails, have 2. Now the next part of this is that we're going to be getting into is what to do with the photos. So first and foremost, they shouldn't live on the physical memory card. I have a lot of customers that will just buy, I have one guy, he has 25 memory cards. I've gone through his history a couple times. He's bought 25 from me over the years. He refuses to delete them off the card, which is fine. If that's the route you guys want to go, that's fine. But the way I look at an SD card is as the vehicle. If your camera is your house, then the computer is your work. And that SD card is traveling in between the 2 to download everything from it. So there's really no point in saving or keeping everything on the SD card because it's meant to be used. It's a tool. So when you're done taking photos, you should be downloading those onto the computer or hard drive or wherever you're going to save them at, and then deleting everything on the card and reusing it again and again. So they don't live on there. My steps to make sure you don't lose anything, this is just the simplest way. You can do this however you want to do it, but I always recommend, and the first are pretty self-explanatory, turn your camera off first and wait a few seconds. If you ever are shooting and you're doing stuff, turn the camera off and hold it next to your ear. You'll hear all of the components on the inside like turning down. You want to wait a couple seconds just to make sure that the camera has saved everything properly, that it's not buffering still. It's the same thing of like when you download something onto the computer and you go to close out of that application and it'll say it's still using that application. It's still processing all that
Could it damage the card if you
it won't necessarily damage the card, but you could lose the photos. Because if the photos are in between transferring from one device to the other, I know it sounds goofy, but they're caught in that limbo period where they're still trying to move over. If you pull out or turn off the camera and try to remove the card too soon, there's a chance that whatever photos you just last took, if they haven't been written down first, they might be gone. So first and foremost, turn it off, wait a few seconds, and then go ahead and remove the card, and then place it into a card reader. Now I do recommend putting it into a card reader and not using your camera to transfer. And the only reason is accidents do happen. I have a water bottle next to my computer. I normally don't do that. But if you've got little ones or pets or you're staying hydrated or maybe you're having a beer after you took a bunch of photos, if you knock that over and you spill it all over the camera and the laptop, you're probably going to kick yourself for doing that. So what I always recommend is to remove the physical card, insert that into the computer or card reader, keep the camera separate and away from you, download your images that way. It'd be a shame if you lost your laptop, but again, at least you limit the amount of damage.
Do many computers have card readers built in?
Not anymore. So, yeah, some still do. The newer MacBook Pros just brought them back, actually. MacBook got rid of them for the longest time, and now the newest models, I don't know what they're called when I was good with computers, but they have them. Some of the Windows and more, let's say, HP, Dell, Lenovo, some of them have them, but typically they don't. And so that's where I do recommend, if you look, you can get them online too, but get yourself a card reader that works for whatever it is that you're doing. If you're using high capacity, let's say Velocity cards or CF Express cards, which judging from the cameras, I don't think any of you guys are, I could be wrong about a few of the cameras, I don't look at the model numbers. This is the type of reader that you're getting. These fit very specific types of cards. They're large, fat, chunky cards, but they are meant to be reading and writing. Like, so for example, when we looked at the earlier SD cards, those are highest for reading and writing at about 90 megabytes a second. These CF Express write about 1,800 to 1,600 megabytes a second. So they're very, very fast cards. None of your cameras are probably using that, and if you are using that, you probably wouldn't know that you're using that. But those are examples of higher end ones. These two are my personal favorite. If you don't have a lot of USB plugs on your computer, something like this has a hub on there too. So if you want to charge a couple devices or plug some other stuff in, you can. And then it's got the card reader on the side. But this one's probably my personal favorite. This is the one I own myself. It was like 25 bucks. One end plugs in regular USB, the other one uses the new USB-C, which depending on the computer you're using, you might be switching to only these plugs. They are phasing these out slowly but surely. This will fit micro and standard SD cards, and it's the size of a USB flash, so literally it's not that big, much bigger than, I don't know, my thumb. But that's a really nice option. So get yourself a card reader. Again, it fits into most camera bags. If you're traveling and you don't bring a camera bag with you, maybe keep the camera around your neck. This will fit into a backpack or a purse or a fanny pack, whatever you're carrying. But definitely get a card reader.
Hard place that wouldn't fit in your bag.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Some people are worried about losing stuff, so I understand. I'm terrible. I like triple check. I went on vacation last October. I kid you not, I made like a little checklist of all my camera gear, and I printed out 2 of them. One of them I brought with me on my trip to count my stuff before I flew back, and the other one I did before like going. It was ridiculous. I'm paranoid about losing stuff. Next steps I would do, so the first thing, you're copying photos. Don't remove them, you're copying them. If you select all the stuff on your SD card to move over to the computer, there should be an option when you right-click to copy them. The reason we're copying them is because you're just duplicating them from the card to the computer. If something does get disconnected, your laptop dies, the power goes out in your house, at least you know that everything's still on the SD card, even if it was in between the transfer and the computer. So copying things over just ensures that you're just duplicating things and that you're not doing a hard move, again, just to be on the safe side with it. And when we say destination folder, you can name it whatever you want. I'm very anal about how I store my photos, so the way that I do it is I have my photos folder Within my photos folder, I have every single year of photography that I've been doing. So from, let's say, the earliest I have on there is probably 2007 or 8, all the way now to 2024. Every year then has every single month, and then when I click on that month, I have everything labeled by the event with the date of when I took the photos. That's how I organize my photos on there, just so that way I have a clear indication of where I was and when it was. Plus, if I'm using I have a Mac, but if you're using whatever system, if you're trying to find that stuff, you can use Finder or Explorer. When you type in whatever the year, the date was, it should pop up almost automatically with that folder and everything else. So even if you forget, let's say you're trying to find Christmas photos and you're like, I don't know, was it 2013 I did that? Was it 2012? You probably can type in 12, 25, 12 or 13 and then find what you're looking for, depending on exactly what it is. But if you can keep yourself organized like that, even if you're taking hundreds and hundreds or thousands of photos and you've got them all compiled on there, it makes it a little easier to narrow it down and find it. So my biggest thing is organization when it comes to photography, as well as obviously taking the photo. Next step on this list is then to copy them to a second place. I mean, this is your backup. So if your computer is your main area to store these guys, you want to make sure you're putting them into a second location to keep them safe. I like the external hard drive option. I like tangible things, so that way I know where they're at. I also don't like remembering passwords. But if you are someone who likes passwords or saving things via cloud-based solutions, which are really popular, Google Drive is probably the most famous one out there. If you have Gmail, you already got it. And if you have Amazon, actually, they have their own too. It's Prime Photos, which I've had a couple customers bring to my attention over the years. It's nice. I have Amazon Prime. I don't use Prime Photos, but I've seen the layout and it's really simple. But definitely put them into a second place. Again, if anything goes wrong, it's nice to have a backup to it. If you lose your computer, you can't transfer from one computer to the other. It'd be a shame if you had all these photography or all these photos and they were just all gone after one day. So have them copied to the computer and then copy them to a second location, whatever makes you the most comfortable. Next step is going to be to physically eject the card before removing it. On a MacBook, it's really easy. You click the SD card, and after you click it, it's actually the garbage can is going to turn to the eject symbol. But if you're using a Windows computer like we're on right now, you just go to the bottom right corner. This little arrow that points upwards, if you click on that guy, it's actually going to then open that up for you, and it'll say to eject whatever the card is. You want to eject it because it's the same reason why we turn the camera off and wait a few seconds. It's to make sure that we've let everything the card's doing be done with it, so that way we know it's safe to remove and that there's nothing being still in use. And then my last step is to format the card in the camera. Formatting the card will erase all old info in the card. So if you go into the settings of your camera, usually you go into where the saving section of your settings are, and there should be an option to format your SD card. You'll hit agree to that. It'll then take a couple minutes, it'll buffer, and then it'll delete everything on the card. But the reason we format the card, and it's a good practice too, if you just buy a brand new card, you should format the card on the camera to start with too, is that you're making sure that the card is primed and ready for the camera you have. My best example would be my camera that I currently have. It's a Sony 7R Mark V. It's a 61 megapixel camera. Every time I take a photo with it, it stores about 100 megabytes of information from one photo. To put that into perspective, the cameras that you guys all have for the most part are saving photos at like 16 to 8 megabytes of information. So these are large files that I get out of my camera. If I didn't properly format my SD card before using it the first couple times, there's probably about 3,000 photos I would lose off of the SD card because my card wasn't set up to work for my camera. So format the card first in the camera if you're getting a brand new card, but in general, always formatting will erase everything, but then it primes the card so it's ready to go. You can also delete them while you're still on the computer, so after you've copied them over and you got everything on there, if you want to go ahead and just select everything on the card and drag it to the trash can, you can absolutely do that too. My only hesitation with that is that if, let's say you're using multiple devices, if you've got multiple cameras, or maybe a drone or a GoPro or anything else, you're going to still want to format the card on each of those individual cameras so that way that card is ready for whatever camera you're using, if that makes sense. So, and to kind of reiterate it with pictures, because I like pictures, your backup plan. So it starts with the SD card. This is how you start with it. Everything's getting saved here. You're inserting that into the computer either via the SD card slot on there or with a SD card reader, whatever you have. And then these are your backup options. You're either going into an external hard drive, which like I said is my personal favorite. I have multiple of these at home. I even have some that are locked away just in case the house ever caught on fire or something. I have everything saved so I don't lose anything ever. Or then use a cloud-based solution. Use something like Prime Photos or Google Drive. On the next slide, I actually have a couple options. So like I said, Google Drive is probably the most well-known. A lot of people I learned with their jobs have a Microsoft account email. I don't, but apparently a lot of people do. OneDrive is available for that, and that's another great solution. My personal favorite though, if you're gonna edit any kind of photo, Adobe is still probably the best editor out there when it comes to photo editing. That's Lightroom, that is Photoshop, and then that's also another one they have for photos. But Lightroom and Photoshop are the two most popular. They also have, when you do their monthly subscription, things like InDesign. They have, Premiere Pro for video. They have website builders. They've got a lot of really cool creative setups that you can use, and they're the ones that everybody uses that are, I'd say, the most popular.
It's costly, though, isn't it?
It's like $50 a month. They used to do where you could buy it all outright and then you have the program forever, but they changed that method and it really is upsetting people. However, though, they have it where if you just want the photo apps, you can pay like $10 a month and just get the 2 photo apps. So that's not a bad deal either. If not, there are other programs, and I think I talk about them either this class or in a later class. But Creative Cloud also has a storage too, so you can store images, anything else that you want. So not a bad idea. Something nice to look into if you do jump down this rabbit hole and get more serious with your photography. So let's go on a tour of the camera. I'd say this is the meat and potatoes of the whole class. This always takes the longest part, but we're going to break down the buttons, the layout, kind of where everything's at. Before I really do that, the one thing I do want to talk about is this mirrorless and DSLR business. We're at this transition period, so when I first started teaching this class maybe 2 years ago, it was at the point where DSLRs were on the way out, people weren't sure. Every time I talk to our vendors, and the only 2 that are really still making DSLRs are Nikon and Canon. Sony prides themselves, they've never made DSLRs. They bought the technology from Minolta. Minolta bought it from Leica. There's a whole story with the DSLR with the mirrorless technology. But to get around that, or to get to the point, the way that cameras work, obviously, is light comes into the camera, and the reason we can see what we see is because of light. The light then will, in the older stuff, will come through, it'll hit the mirror. The mirror then sends that through a pentaprism, and then we can see it through the optical viewfinder. So that's the trick. If you have a DSLR in front of you, if you take the lens cap off and you look through the optical viewfinder, even with the camera turned off, you're always going to see something. Whereas with the mirrorless camera, that's not the case, because there's no mirror on the inside, there's nothing to bounce that back. So if the camera's turned off, you're not seeing anything. When it comes to the technology though, because the mirror is gone and there's less going on with the camera there, these guys are better for low light situations, mirrorless. They are faster, they are more accurate. This is a debate that I get with a lot of other professional photographers, but when you really compare the specs and the technology, mirrorless is sharper overall. On top of that too, they're quicker and they're lighter weight, which is the biggest selling point I would say between the 2. DSLRs are on their last leg. You got about another year, and then you won't see them manufactured anymore. You're still going to be able to get products, and you're still going to be able to buy new lenses and everything else, but depending on the age of your camera, it might not be a bad idea to start thinking about investing in a mirrorless camera. A lot of the brands do have adapters that can bring your old lenses over, so that way you don't have to reinvest in all the glass that you spent money on. That joke in the camera community is always still the same. Mirror your lenses, date your body. The body will become outdated, it'll get worn down, it'll stop being useful after a certain point in time, and usually after about 10 years or so with your camera, you're going to notice that it's not as quick as it used to be. No pun intended with that. I've had a few people laugh at that one. It's not a euphemism, I promise. DSLRs are great though. If you can still get one and you get a good deal on it, I'd say if a brand new one comes up, by all means, like that's totally great. But if you're in that kind of in-between position, I would really strongly encourage to go mirrorless. I went mirrorless about 2 years ago. Got rid of all my DSLR gear that I had, and it made a big difference, at least in my photography mindset. But yeah, camera gets slimmer on the side profile. Camera overall is smaller in between. Lighter weight. There's just a lot of nice improvements between the two technologies. Do they still do and function very similar? Absolutely. You're not losing anything from there. If you're coming from film into the digital camera world, I'd say that's totally different. But as far as DSLR and mirrorless, if you know how to use a DSLR, you'll know how to use a mirrorless.
And lenses are interchangeable between
Yeah,
cameras.
so they're still interchangeable. It's a little goofy. So if it's Nikon went from their old FX mount, which has been used forever. That was since the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. They moved from their old, I forgot what the one before that was. The F mount on the cameras are interchangeable on the new Z mount cameras. You just need an adapter. And for Canon, it's the same boat. You just need an RF adapter as well. The RF adapter and the Z adapter basically won't change your aperture, won't change your shutter, and they don't really have any negative features on the overall image quality. The only downside to them, and I warn people, all that weight you're losing from going from DSLR to mirrorless, you're going to gain it right back with that adapter. So if weight is the big concern of you switching from the old to the new, you're not going to lose any, or you're not going to really get that any. Like, that's the one downside to it. It's still going to be heavy. So we'll start with the top of your camera. Now, again, some of these buttons might not be on your camera body if you look at them, but they're most likely, if not, they are going to be inside the menu system. So if you don't see a button up here and you do want to know where that is, let me know. I can point it out on the camera. So we'll start. First one I got on there is the video start and stop button. Most of the time on your camera, you're going to have a red dot or a red circle on your camera. When you're using automatic settings, it's really nice. You can just hit that button and it'll automatically start recording video for you. Easy to use, quick. If you don't want to go to the movie feature that sometimes they have on there, it'll automatically just start recording in the automatic setting. Power switch is typically going to always be on the right grip of the camera. That's meant so you can use your index finger to trigger it on and off. And typically the power switch is going to be somewhere around that shutter release button. Now the reason they do that, same idea, when you're taking pictures, if there's a period of time that you're not taking photos anymore, it's good practice to turn the camera off. Don't waste your battery life on there. You only get maybe 600 to 700 shots on one battery go. So if you can turn it on and off in between, it'll overall help prolong that, especially if you're sightseeing, on vacation, doing something else. That's the shutter release button. Exposure compensation. Somewhere on your camera, mostly on the top. It can, though, be on the front menu system. You should have a plus and a minus sign in a little box. Kind of looks like a yin and a yang symbol, but it's plus and minus in a little box. Exposure compensation deals with the overall exposure of what you're looking at. So if you are using automatic, or maybe you're fancy, you've learned manual, you've got your shutter set to 1 250th of a second, ISO's at 3200, and your aperture is at 2.8, you're wide open. And then it might all be mumbo jumbo, but disregard that point. If the image still looks too light or too dark, and you've set everything perfectly the way that you want it to look, exposure compensation allows for you to make the image darker or lighter without needing to worry about the rest of the stuff. You can do it in post. However, and this is how I word it to people, it's easier to make a photo that's too light darker than it is to make a photo that's too dark lighter. The more we push the photo in the opposite exposure when it's like in the computer or post, the more grainy, pixelated, and just not as good as it looks anymore. So if you notice that your photo as you're taking it doesn't look the way you want it to, either it's too dark, too light, it's preferred or better for your experience. If you press this button here, use then the dial, the command dial, to then change that. So a lot of the times what you'll notice is that cameras have 2 dials on there. Usually they'll have one on the front grip, and then this one usually next to what we call the mode dial, which I'll explain in a second there. Those command dials are used to control things like aperture and shutter. when we are setting our speeds, and we talk about this more in the intermediate class, the faster an object is moving, the faster we want to make shutter go. Because the idea behind that is that if we can capture it at the exact moment, we should get them in a still picture. The best example I can use is if like you're watching sports or NASCAR or F1, any of the racing stuff, especially racing, you'll hear the cameras, it's like a what they're doing is a fast, high burst photo, and I'll explain what that button is as well too, but then they're having their shutter speed at a much faster speed. That's all controlled through the command dial. And depending on your camera's layout, again, it could be at the top, the little dial that you'll pull across, or it could be in the back, which is where you use your thumb to control that. Don't worry about it too much right now, because the only thing you should be focusing on is the little green icon that says automatic. That's where we're starting with this whole thing. That's where you should start. I get a lot of people that get frustrated with their cameras because they decide to get real fancy with it, and they don't know how to use any of the features. So stay away from that for now. Just keep that in mind that that's what those dials are. They're command dials. When you click on other buttons or have other settings open, that's when those dials come into play. Your mode dial is like your gear shift on the car. It's what puts you into park, reverse, neutral, all that good stuff. This is the same idea. You have automatic, and then you have a few other settings, which I think on another slide I'll break all those down, so I will save for now. That's your way of dictating exactly what the camera is going to do and how you're going to then control it. I like the automatic on these new mirrorless cameras. I think they do fantastic. The technology on there is quick and easy. Even DSLRs do a really good job of reading the environment. And really what automatic is doing is it's reading the light that it sees out there, and then it sees where its subject matter is via autofocus and via the autofocus points, and then it locks into that target and then calculates all the numbers. Live view switch. So DSLRs are going to have this, mirrorless won't. You don't have to really worry about this for mirrorless users. There should be a display button on mirrorless cameras. That display button will then switch between your ability to look through the screen or look through the viewfinder, or just what the screen is going to look like. But if you have a live view switch, most of the time when you turn your camera on, it's not going to show you the image of what you're taking a picture of. It's going to show you the stats of what the camera is set to and what it's adjusting itself to. And when you want to see it, you put it up to your eye, and then you can see through the image. With the live view switch, you pull that trigger on there, and it's actually going to then take you into either the screen being lit up or the viewfinder, so you can toggle between the two. That's what that LV stands for. That's the top of the camera. Start with auto. Again, auto is going to look probably like this. If not, some of them will probably get rid of the auto on there. It might just be the camera. Others might just literally have auto. Everybody does it differently. Sony, I think, does it with an A and a plus symbol next to it.
Mine's just A.
Yeah, yours is just A.
I have an A and an IA too.
Yeah, so you want to go to IA. So, goofy enough, and I think I'll say it in just a moment or two. IA is intelligent auto. Your A on the camera is aperture. So it's kind of goofy, I forgot. Panasonic doesn't do anything in green, but most of the other camera brands will have a green symbol on there, and that's automatic. So yours is a little different. So mode dials, every brand does it a little bit differently. Again, read your manual, take a look at things on there, look your camera up specifically online to get familiarized with it. There's your Sony over here with your A with a plus in the box. This is going to be one of the old Canon ones. Nikon did something similar. And then this is also another Sony one that's a little bit different as well with the auto written out. Every brand has a different dial. However, the same things are on all the dials. So it's not like it's the same debate I have when people are like, well, Apple and Android are very different. It's like, not really. They are layout-wise and how they choose to present themselves, but overall the same features are all there. So keep that in mind with your camera. If you're deciding to switch between brands, you might notice that. Take your time.
Disconnect your car.
All good, all good. So to go through them a little bit, auto or A+, that's auto control over settings and functions of the camera. Again, stick with that. That's your starting point. Once you get more comfortable with that, and there's ways I'll teach you that you can kind of familiarize yourself with the camera to be more comfortable with that, then you can move to these other ones. M, that's full manual. That's going to give you control over every different array of function on the camera itself. If you feel comfortable with that, go for it, but I do recommend waiting, because if you jump into that immediately and you don't understand how to read and adjust light, it's probably going to make you upset.
Yeah.
A or AV is aperture priority, and we'll talk more in detail on that next week, but aperture priority or aperture f-stops are your background and foreground control of the camera. When you're shooting a photo, it's your ability to blur the background out and focus on your subject matter with a low number. And with a high number, it's able to get everything into one picture. So depending on what you're trying to do, aperture priority might be the better setting for you. When we say it's priority, it means that's the only thing you're manually controlling. The camera's doing the rest of the work for you. S or TV, and I don't really know where the TV comes from. I just know S is shutter, and if you see a TV on your camera, that's also shutter priority. I couldn't tell you. Shutter priority is going to be your ability to control the speed at which the camera is firing and closing its shutter, capturing your image. Again, if you're at a NASCAR, or your kids run track and field, or maybe you're watching the boat races at Navy Pier this summer, whatever it is, if you're doing something and you see a lot of speed that's happening around you, sometimes automatic doesn't do a great job of capturing that because it just can't focus in on that stuff. Shutter priority would be a good option as well too. Then you can control just the speed at which the camera's firing and opening, and then the camera's going to do the rest of the work for you. Not a bad one to experiment with either. P or program auto, and you should all have a P on there. That's my personal favorite one. And I think as a beginner, you can easily graduate from auto within maybe a week of practicing into the P program. It means that aperture, shutter, and ISO, everything's already auto, but now you get to control a bunch of other features on there. So things like that exposure compensation I just mentioned, you can control. Things like light metering, which is the camera's ability to read the light and how it chooses to do that. Things like auto white balance can be controlled too, and those give you more control over the camera, without making you feel like you're doing full manual control. So camera's still going to control all the basic things you need to take the picture, but if you want to make it a little lighter or a little darker, you can. If maybe you've got a candle lit on the table and you just want to focus in on that candle light, you don't want other light on there, you can play with the light metering tool. If, let's say, you're indoors and like right now we've got canned recessed lighting and it's more on the warm tone of the lighting scale, of the Kelvin scale, maybe you want to switch the auto white balance to more fluorescent. You can do those kinds of things. Those are small tweaks that won't that'll still give you auto control, but now you're a photographer, you're playing with the settings. So not a bad one to graduate into. Then B is for bulb. I don't really understand where it came from, but if you think of old-timey photographers, they'd throw like a carpet over their heads, hold a stick with dust on it, and then it would flash. That's what bulb stands for. The same thing if you had the Brownie camera and you put the little light bulb on it. Anywho, the camera is fully customizable, but as long as you're holding the shutter release, the camera's going to stay open. If you want to do long exposure photography, if you want to do starry sky photography, you know, we just had the Milky.
Oh, the eclipse.
Not the eclipse, but
the Borealis.
Yeah, Borealis. A lot of my friends were out there in like places like Lake Forest taking photos. The ability that they had to just let their camera stay open for, let's say, 20 seconds, that made such a beautiful image, and the green that was coming off of that was just really cool. So you can do fun stuff with the B setting on there, but I would absolutely research online, watch some videos on other settings you should switch on to make that happen. Regardless though, stick with automatic. That's going to be your best bet. Now, if you do have an older DSLR model, you're going to have these things called scenes. And scenes have all these little shapes and symbols on there. All that is automatic, but just for different specific things. So if you see the one with the little white box and a star there, that's for nighttime photography. You got the little running guy, that's for sports or action. The flower is for close-up photography. The mountain with a cloud is your landscape. The face is a portrait. CA, I want to say, is customizable auto. I don't really, honestly, I've never never used the CA setting myself, and I've had a couple people tell me, but I always get a different answer. Honestly though, oh, and then there's no flash. They don't put these on newer cameras because the technology is a little outdated and it really doesn't make too much sense. A lot of customers complain that these don't really do what they want them to do. It's a nice way of telling the camera that, hey, you know, I'm taking pictures of sports or I'm taking pictures at night. But at the same time, you can really just let automatic do that for you and you'll be just fine. So use them at your own discretion. I've had a lot of people complain and say that when they use those settings, it doesn't do what they want it to do. Getting back into the camera. So if you have a camera that's a DSLR or an entry-level mirrorless, you will have a flash somewhere. A lot of the entry-level mirrorless just have it where you can pop the flash up. You don't even need to click a button. But a lot of the DSLR cameras have a button to click the flash. So press that down when the camera's turned on. That thing should just pop right up. Function button can be a lot of different things. So for some cameras, that's your way to get into your menu system. There's another button I'll show in a little bit. Function can be menu. Function can also be customizable settings. So if you're using the camera and you have a section, maybe let's say you like light metering a lot, you can set the function button so it takes you to light metering immediately. Let's say you want to change white balance or exposure compensation. You can set the FN button to do just that. My Sony camera, when I press FN, that takes me to my ability to switch my autofocus targets, my target recognition, my white balance, all sorts of different stuff on there. So it's, again, different for every camera.
I got 8. There's 8 of them on here.
What do you got?
No, 8 FNs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So when you have that many FNs, what's nice is you can customize every single one of them. And so when you get more comfy with every button, or when you get more comfy with the camera as a whole, if you're using manual or shutter or aperture priority, those then give you the ability to edit and change things on there. So you could literally be like, you know, I don't like how my camera's registering light. Press FN2, and then that'll open up.
Kind of like a macro or some sort. Yeah, it's placement.
Exactly. Shortcuts. FN is like your shortcut button.
I probably missed it when I went out, but that was one of the, before I came in here, I read the manual. When would you want to use the metering or the FN? I mean, is it, do you need it into basic photography or?
Not so the metering and stuff when you're doing it, and this is where you missed it. So automatic, if you want to if you don't want to worry about metering, stick on the auto. That way, you know, you don't have to think about it too much. You can control the camera settings. When you graduate from auto, the first thing I recommend is programming.
That's what I thought.
Because that's still automatic completely, but then
yeah, I tried that with my Lumix. That's what I went to after I made.
That one's a good one to use. And then again, when you get more comfortable, depending on the camera, like his Lumix has multiple FN buttons. If you want a shortcut to get to that, you can then set the FN button to get there quicker. If that is something you want to change. If you don't like it, stick with this.
Okay.
We're just not. So, zoom ring from there. If you have a lens that's a telephoto lens, and we'll talk more about lenses next week so I don't confuse you too much today. The zoom ring is just that. Turning it clockwise is going to then extend the lens. Turning it counterclockwise will retract the lens back in. Somewhere on the lens, whether that's in the front or the back of the lens, you'll have another ring, and that's the focus ring. If you're not using autofocus or automatic focus on the camera, the focus ring is what's going to then help you focus in. If you're shooting video, I highly recommend you do manual focus. One of the biggest things is that if you've got your camera set up on a tripod, you hit record. My best example, I had to record a speech the other day. I'm using manual focus. And the reason I'm using manual focus is if anybody walks in front of my camera, if you're on autofocus, the camera's job is going to be focus on what's closest to the camera. So if someone cuts in front of your view, their camera's going to completely move into focus on what walked in front of it. And then it's going to take a while to like reload to get focused back in on your target. So keep it on manual focus, and you'll use the focus ring. Next is the lens retract button. Not a lot of lenses have this, but if you have a DSLR camera, you might still have this. Because there's not really a lot of advanced AI or computer processing in the older lenses, they typically can be flimsy. And if you're traveling with your lens, sometimes a tendency that can happen is that the lens will extend in your bag, and then if the bag gets crushed or hit or bumped, that could actually snap the lens into two. So the lens retract button was designed to keep the lens basically locked into place, and that's why sometimes, like, if you're shooting with the newer Nikon lenses, those will have it where you'll have to click, and you'll hear a click when you get to a certain point. Older Canon and Nikon lenses will have this lens retract button, which is very similar. The lens release button does exactly that. If you're using something with interchangeable lenses, hold in on the button and turn counterclockwise. That's going to remove the lens from the camera body. Insert the camera lens back onto the camera. You're going to match up the dots that are on the camera. That's typically how they symbolize it. Excuse me. And then turn clockwise. You'll hear a click. That's how you know it's locked into place. And then the drive mode button. So when I talked about earlier with like F1 NASCAR sport photography where you hear that this is where you can accomplish that feature. So you got two options on here. There should be a stack of squares and a little timer symbol on there. I don't use the timer all that often, especially not anymore since they put the apps on your phone and you can connect the phone to it. You can almost use the phone as a remote control, and you know, depending, I had to do headshots for a portfolio review of mine, and I was able to set my camera on a tripod, sit on a stool in front of it, change my settings, and then just click when I was ready. I could just keep the phone behind my back and do it. But if you're old school, you don't want to use the Wi-Fi Bluetooth feature on the camera, there is a timer in this same section. But what this drive mode means is that how is your camera operating on speed? Is it doing just a single burst photography or photo where it's just taking one individual photo? You know, do you see the bird that's about to take flight? You want to get 15, 14 photos in a row where it's that noise that you're used to or you hear at sporting events? Or are you about to take a family portrait? Do you want to set it up and then run to get in front of the camera? You can do either one of those on there, and that's what you get to decide with that drive mode button. Other than that, we don't label it, but those are all your extra ports on there. One should be charging, one should be a microphone if you ever want to put a microphone on the hot shoe plate, and the other one is usually a wireless or a trigger. I don't think any of y'all will be using a trigger, but if you ever were, it's a little button that plugs in, and it's a plunger technique. So literally you sit there and it's like being in the grammar school photography where you're getting your picture for the yearbook taken and just do that. So it looks stupid in my opinion. Now you got the back of your camera. Menu button, pretty self-explanatory. That's going to take you into the menu system of the camera. These are more advanced settings, and they're not necessarily advanced to change the image that we're taking, but it's things like time and date. It's things like formatting your card. It's things like, do you like the button layout? Do you like the screen brightness? Do you want to change the volume on your camera? One thing we talk about in the advanced class is doing some extra accessories that have a lot of power to them. If you've bought a new TV in the past few years, you'll notice that the TV speakers are junk. And they usually make you buy a sound bar if you want to get better sound because they're focused on the video quality. Cameras are the same boat. They focus so much on the picture quality, they usually neglect the microphone. So if you are taking video, you're probably going to want to get yourself a microphone to throw in the hot shoe eventually. So menu button takes you into the menu system of the camera. Usually doesn't affect image quality, but affects kind of the entire rest of the function of the camera. Diopter adjustment. If you wear glasses like myself, this is your way of going to the eye doctor where they say, okay, 1 or 2. The diopter adjustment, you turn until you see the clearness through. Depends on how you want to shoot. I personally, when I'm using this, will remove my glasses and then put it up to my eye. Just because if I put my glasses up to this, I'm still letting light bleed in, and so when it hits the glasses, it sometimes messes up what I'm seeing in the viewfinder. So keep that in mind when you're shooting. It's either or. If you adjust with your glasses on and then you put your eye up to it, you might notice it looks a little wonky. But if you're always wearing glasses or you're wearing contacts specifically when you want to use this, you should be fine. Info button. This is probably one of my most favorite buttons on the camera. This is probably my favorite. I probably use good English there. If you're using info, for some cameras, if you press info, that's going to toggle like the live view does, where it switches you between what you're seeing on the physical camera. But my other favorite use of it, if you're using the image playback button, So you press on this guy. When you click on info, it will tell you exactly what the camera did to take that picture, or if you're using manual controls, it'll tell you what it did to take that picture. So what I like to use this for is if you're a beginning photographer and you're using automatic, find your favorite picture on your camera, hit the info button when you find that picture. From there, it should break down what the shutter speed was, what the aperture was, what the ISO was. And when it comes to photography, and I'll explain it too in the intermediate class, so much of it is trial and error. It's you taking a photo and saying, wow, the lighting was really good in this photo. What did my camera do for me there? Like, what was the ISO? And that's what that means, it's light sensitivity. Okay, well, the background was really nice and blurry, and the person I was taking a picture of, my daughter, she's in perfect focus, okay? So what was my aperture at? All right, well, this kid was running full speed to get down to the bouncy house. What was the speed at which my camera was firing? Those are the types of information that the info button will tell you. And I always like to look at it as like a mental note of like, oh, okay, so there was like, you know, it wasn't an overcast day, bright sun, so the camera told me 100 ISO. All right, they were running, it was a moderate pay, I mean, whatever it was, like there wasn't that much speed, but there was a good amount of speed. Okay, that's the shutter. And then aperture, okay, well, it blurred this much out, I didn't want to see that, so you make a mental note of those things, because then as you start becoming more advanced with your modes on there, and you start switching from auto to something else, that's kind of your jumping off point that I tell people about. So I love the info button, especially for entry-level photographers. I think it's a great way to learn exactly what your camera, what your tool is doing for you. Exposure, lock, or focus. This button has two features. Depending on how you're using it and how you're clicking or setting it up, autofocus is going to be the one feature of it. If you are shooting on the camera, you have two choices. That trigger that makes the picture go click. If you do a half squeeze on that trigger, you'll see the boxes pop up. That's your focusing. But if you use this AEL or AFL button that's on there, that's also going to do the same thing for you. So some people feel more comfortable, they'll use their thumb to lock in and they'll pull the trigger when they're ready. Other people, let's say that you're getting ready to set up your own business and maybe you're doing food or clothing of some sort. Maybe instead of, you know, having it where you're holding the camera the whole time, you put it on a tripod. And when the camera's on the tripod and you're angling it at the same spot and you're just maybe moving stuff in and out, like I had someone the other week who came in and they're setting up a business where they're taking pictures for restaurants, getting their online menus set up, or ordering on like Uber Eats or Grubhub. And so literally they set the tripod up, cameras on the tripod, and they'd have food on the table, and all they would do is they put a little piece of tape for a mark on there. They would just slide the next plate over, hit the trigger. Slide the plate over, hit the trigger. By using the focus lock on there, they were able to make sure they locked onto that exact same spot every single time, so they didn't have to go and hold down the trigger and wait for it to load and focus in, because they were just moving the same item from the same distance from the camera, so nothing was changing. That's a really useful thing, again, depending on how your hand is structured, but then also depending on if that's something you ever want to use. I do like the exposure lock a lot. Image playback, pretty self-explanatory. It's got this triangle with a box around it. Press that, plays the image back for you. The I button is similar to FN. There's also on brands like Fujifilm a Q button. All that basically does is take you into a menu system of the camera where you can change things like white balance or exposure compensation or autofocus targets or autofocus parameters, whatever it is. Same thing as FN for some of them. Same thing as FN for some cameras. Same thing as Q for some cameras. I button is just one of those. Then you have your OK button. Pretty self-explanatory. Hit OK if you're deleting a photo or if you're moving through it, making changes in the menu. And then you got your multi-selector, which is just your D-pad to move around and change things. Last thing, you got delete button, also self-explanatory. You got a magnifier, demagnifier. It doesn't magnify the zoom on the camera. A lot of people think by pressing that it's going to make me zoom in or out. Instead, what that does is if you're hitting the playback button, and let's say you want to see it, did I get a good image, did I lock it and get it in focus? What I like to do is use the magnifier to zoom in until the image gets pixelated, and I see how crisp the lines of the image are. That's my indication of whether or not my focus and everything else was nice on the camera. So I use that as a tool to just triple check my images as I'm going. Somewhere on there you should have the magnifier, demagnifier. Some cameras don't have those buttons, and instead the multi-selector is a ring, and it'll turn for you as well. And that's like your zoom in, zoom out kind of situation. This is an image that a customer sent me like 2 years ago, and I threw this in the presentation. They were really upset. They thought their camera didn't work. I think of it as it's not the bat, it's the baseball player. Sometimes we just don't know how to use our gear. Like I said, stick with automatic. It will do the trick. But if you are getting images like this, let's talk about it. Let's figure out what settings and what you're not doing right. Because, I mean, I've sold a lot of cameras. I think maybe 2 cameras in my entire time of doing this has like actually backfired on a customer. It's been a lemon. Most of the time you get one of these products, they all work really well. So keep that in mind.
2 martinis.
Your camera isn't a smartphone. There's things on the smartphone that make it super easy to take a picture on there, and that's fantastic. And it's great for people who are just getting started. But keep in mind that the camera does take a little bit of time to load, it takes a little bit to fire, and on top of that too, where this has some AI intuitive technology that helps focus and figure things out, especially if you have the new 15 or even the 14 model of iPhones that boast their camera features. Or, I mean, Google Pixel has the #1 camera right now. Any phone, Samsung is not far behind them too. There's a lot of great phones out there, but your camera, if used properly, is going to take better, if not greater photos than what the phone will do. The problem is that you got to give it a little bit of time and love and just practice with it, play with it. Don't get what's the term I'm looking for? Don't get bogged down by the fact that you don't know how to maybe use something yet. Like, it takes time. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I started taking pictures. I've been shooting on film before I moved into digital for years. It probably took me 3 good years to learn how to use a digital camera properly, and then film is a whole different story. But I always like to joke, if you can know how to do film, digital cameras make a lot of sense too. It's moving from one to the other. This might seem silly, but I like talking about it for an intro class. 2 things that artists and just creators as a whole deal with are carpal tunnel and arthritis. So making sure that we can prevent having back problems, because that's another deterrent from us wanting to bring a big camera with us, is my back hurts or I don't want to lug that thing around. Holding your camera with your arms out is not a good idea. You're like, I don't even know how to word it. You're winging it. I don't like that. People can bump into you. That can also put the camera at risk of getting damaged. You also kind of look silly when you do something like this. So I like to consider this like the porch method, where like if you had a porch for your house, you'd have supports underneath it that would hold the porch up on the house. So using your arms, you're locking them into place. A hand should be on the bottom of the camera, preferably on the lens for focusing and for zooming purposes. And then the other hand goes on that nice big bulky grip on the right side. I've never seen a left-handed camera. I mean, it might exist, but I've never seen it. For the most part, it's always on the right-hand side. When we're shooting the camera, we should try to keep a straight back as best as we can. It's the same idea when you're lifting something. You lift with your legs, not with your back. So when you're taking a picture, dip down and try to keep your back nice and low. A lot of cameras nowadays have a pop-up screen on there too, so that way you can lower the camera and have the screen facing you as you're taking the picture. That's another option on there. Obviously, we're going to have times when we need to do something like this, and not to say it's going to cause you a problem, but you keep doing that over a couple days, especially if you're on vacation. If you do a bunch of this or a bunch of this, you're probably not going to want to get out of bed one day. So, focus, then shoot, and shoot through the whole picture. I get a lot of people where they'll like, okay, I just want to take a picture of that chair. Well, that's great, but remember that not only is it that chair, there's an entire scene around the chair. So focusing in on one object is great, but if you don't focus through the whole thing and then take your time to shoot through, you'll rush photos, they'll come out blurry, things will look pixelated, And then there's another reason why we get frustrated with our cameras, because we think we're doing one thing, but it's not giving us the result we want. So focus and shoot through the whole picture. If you or the camera are moving, you're going to get blurry photos. There are artists that have made a lot of money selling blurry pictures. We are not those artists. We are just people who are trying to capture memories or promote a business or maybe start something really cool. If this is the type of image you're getting every single time, nobody's going to care after a certain period of time, and you're probably going to not like them in a couple of years. Focus, make sure that you're not moving, and if you are moving, try to keep yourself as stationary as possible. When I'm shooting, I like to take my arms and dig them into my chest. So when I'm shooting, this is my stability, so I don't shake as much with the camera. If you still suffer from tremors or shakes, get a tripod, get a monopod. I know it's bulky, it's more gear you gotta carry with you, but in the long run of things, it'll probably help a lot. So think about it, invest in that if you need it.
What about, you're talking about not moving, but there's a lot of times on vacations, you're gonna be on a ship or a train or something like that. You're not moving, but
Yeah. A lot of the times, that kind of stuff can be altered with a shutter speed change, or with making sure that we are just as locked in as we can be. I was on a train going from London to Manchester and it's speeding by, and I just changed my shutter speed to be at 1/1000th of a second. Took pictures, and I was able to get the nice long fields of Britain and the UK while on a train that was going 116 miles an hour. So there are ways you can do it and get around it, but the idea is that if you are bobbing and weaving, you're going to get images like that. If you can slow yourself down and your environment's still going fast, there's always ways to tweak it once you get more advanced with the camera. These are the basics that I have learned over the time and that I learned in college for taking better photos or great photos. There's small ideas. One thing I will always say to customers is that, just people in general, rules are always meant to be broken. So look at these, understand them, but at the same time, don't be afraid to break these rules by any means. This is not set in stone, but this is what people or photographers or professors or whatever it is will tell you is the starting point to taking good photos. So first and foremost, fill the frame. When it comes to something like headshots, or let's start with this. There's a term in photography that we're going to call negative space. Negative space is space that is around whatever the subject is or the main point of what we're trying to accomplish. That is basically not detrimental, but it just does not help us at all. In this case, we have this wall around her, which is all negative space. You can see the molding in the wall, where the lines come in for the drywall. And then you can also see the molding on the floor there, and I believe up on the top there where the ceiling and the wall meet, and where then we get that extra shadow.
She's tall. She's tall.
Or she's sitting on a stool, one of the two. But regardless, you get all this extra parts of the wall there, and you just don't need it. It distracts from the main point. If you're trying to put a headshot together for a resume or something else, or maybe you just want to take a nice photo of your friend or your kids or your grandma or your mom, whatever it is, if you have all this extra stuff going on in the image, it might detract from the main subject matter, which is her. So focusing in, getting rid of all that stuff, it'll help and just make the photo look and pop a little bit more. So that could be one of two things. That could be you cropping at the end of this and then bringing this in. Or this could literally be you repositioning the camera to get closer, or in the same way setting the tripod and zooming in a little bit more and focusing on the face. So fill the frame as best as you can when you think it's appropriate. Eyes in the top third. This photo doesn't do a good justice of it, but it gets it in perspective. Your eyebrows and your eyes are considered your eye cavity section. They're the top third of really your head. Forehead being the top, the kind of the upper part of this cranium and the skull, then being the second part, depending on how big of a head you got. I got a big one, so it works when I explain it for myself. And then also, then you've got your middle kind of half where the nose hits, and then the lower half, which would basically be the bottom lip to the chin. When we look at a photo, we can divide also the photo into three different sections. You've got your top third, your middle third, and your bottom third. If we can get the eyes or the, the eyebrows into the top third of the photo, we're going to basically make it more stimulating or more pleasing to the human eye. There's things that humans really love, and it's finding similarities between themselves and what they're looking at. And it might not necessarily be like the most subconscious thing, but there's a reason why humans like looking at certain paintings or drawings for periods of time, because they can recognize humanoid shapes, if that makes sense. Some people love an abstract painting like what you see behind you. Other people like looking at, the painting that Leonardo da Vinci did, where it's like you see perfect proportions and everything else. We like to find those similarities. So if we keep the eyes in the top third of the image, which I would say that his left eyebrow, given that there's a slight tilt, is hitting that perfectly. When we look back at the other image, where we filled the frame, we're hitting that nearly perfectly if we divide this into 3 sections. And when worst case scenario, when all else fails, focus in on the eyes. The cameras that you guys have in front of you have really great eye detection, and so many times, out of every time, you'll get a little box that pops up over an eye. That is because back in the day, you'd get red eye when you took photos, and you'd get those like demon-looking eyes on film. They really helped fix that with the new digital and mirrorless cameras. So when it does come down to the wire, focusing in on the eye will help stabilize the entire image. And number 1 can make it look a lot more pleasing, but then number 2, just in general, make a prettier or more effective image. Eyes are the gateway to the soul. It's kind of a dated term, or just one that's been tossed around so much. But you can see how beautiful the eye color is. You've got blue, green, brown, some tan colors in there. The reflection that's coming off of a light that's in the background there. There's a lot going on there. They're probably one of the most interesting features overall. The other thing, too, to think about is that if we were to divide this thing, her eyes are basically in the top third. They're not even on the line. They're above. So another thing to keep in mind. When it comes to kids, small animals, smaller people, or just pictures where maybe people are sitting down or dining, if you can drop down and get on the level of the people that are there, so you're not shooting down at them, you're shooting at the same level of them, it can add a little bit more pizzazz to the photo. This is a very candid shot, and we probably all have a photo like this of when we were kids or of our own kids right now. However, though, if we can sit in a chair and take a picture on their level, we could probably produce something closer to this, which has more of a professional quality to it. Whether or not this image was staged is one point, but to break it really down, when it comes to kids and everything else, we build this hierarchy scale where if we're shooting down at them, we're making them smaller than us, which to who's ever looking at it might be like, oh, okay, cool, this is whatever. Like it's just a photo, it's just a candid picture. But to add that touch of professionalism, to give also the kids more of a platform, or to give the animal a platform, whatever it is, shooting at their same level is a great idea. I have a golden retriever, one's 9 years old, I have one that's 9 months old. I will lay on my belly and take pictures of them all the time, and I shoot either at their level or like up. Make that hand up, like up towards them. And it's really fun. The images are really cool looking and they're fun. And that's the second part of it too, is that if we can get lower as well too and shoot up at them, we're then giving them more of the power. And so if someone looks at this image, you got a really nice symmetry going on here. Almost all the heads are in a row, which adds to that kind of thing we like to look at, which is symmetry. There's another thing we're going to talk about, a rule, if you will, in photography. But animals, people, kids, whatever it is, if we can shoot at their level or above or lower than them to get that image, it's going to look really nice. This is the rule that you'll constantly hear in photography. It's called the rule of thirds. The idea behind it is that we can divide an image into 9 squares, or 3 different sections, both going from top, middle, bottom to right, center, left. And in those sections, there are then crosshairs, where if we can hit these crosshair notes, typically, on average, now again, this can always be broken, the rule of thirds, but realistically, if we can hit those, we're offering something that's stimulating to the human eye. So to start, you got this surfer dude. One of the things we'll talk about is sun being behind your back, when it's good, when it's bad. In this case, the sun being behind him is really dramatic, and it adds a really cool look to the image. On top of that, this guy's hitting the middle rule of thirds on the right side and the bottom rule of thirds perfectly. Now, you could consider from the first image where we said get rid of negative space that everything around him is negative space. However, given that he's hitting the rule of thirds really nicely and the back has this very beautiful color texture to it, the water looks really nice, the clear shiny sand looks really nice, this overall just looks like a cool stimulating image. So having this and not getting rid of this extra space just builds the environment, the atmosphere. It'd be a cool picture if you were on vacation and you got something like that. On top of that, and this gets again more technical, you have a horizon line. That horizon line is in the background. And now this doesn't only apply to water stuff, but this applies basically to where the background or the sky, if you will, meets our ground, meets our foreground. If we are above the horizon line, we should basically be seeing underneath. So like this is why when you look, you can kind of see under the chin if it wasn't so dark. But then when we're below the horizon line, we're seeing down. And that's why we can see the bottom of his foot, or the top of his foot, if you will. It's a small little thing, but it's based on the way that our perspective is laid out. So we have a really nice horizon line that goes with the top third there, and then this dramatic shot, which just looks really cool. A lot of beach pictures on this one. I think there might be one more if I'm not mistaken, but regardless, a little different on this one. We've got a black and white photo of an overcast day. There seems to be sun peeking through the clouds over here, and that's why we have this kind of washed out light that's coming through. However, it looks extremely dramatic. That water on the horizon line is nearly perfect with the top third, and the little girl's shoulder and ankle hit those marks perfectly. So it's a small little detail like that that just adds maybe a little bit of dramaticism, professionalism to the photo. Mix that in with the black and the white. I think it looks really nice. Another one, this one always irks me a little bit, and I tell people, I just wish mom and dad were moved over slightly on this one so they were lined up perfectly. But assuming brother and sister, you've got them there, mom and dad are a little further to the left. Again, you have another image that's just showing off the idea of the rule of thirds. The other thing too, we talk about hierarchy scale and those moving kids being on their level, rather than, because now you've got mom and dad and brother and sister, most likely, rather than have them next to each other where these kids are like down to here and then mom and dad are up here, instead they move the kids forward maybe 3 or 4 feet, giving the illusion that they're close to height on these guys. I mean, that kid's probably no older than like 7 or 8. This, actually vice versa, he might be like 6, I don't really know. And then she's probably like 9 or 10. But regardless, they're very small compared to mom and dad. So moving them back and forth to get that and achieve a certain angle really does help to add a little bit more to the photo as well too. So this goes into shooting on their level, which they definitely did. Mom and dad are a little higher, and the kids are more on level with where the photographer is probably at. Lastly, I like to use this one again because not only do we see it in photography that we're using, but we also see it in pop culture. If you've ever watched The Office, they do these little mock interviews where they'll have them in a certain part of the office and they'll talk to them. We know that this is the conference room if you've watched the show, because that little bit of extra detail of the curtains there and that little tree there kind of give away where they're at. But same idea, they're utilizing something like the rule of thirds to, number one, explain where they're at without cutting through negative space and getting rid of that. But same idea, eyebrows or eyes are going to hit that top third, which it does perfectly. He's lined up almost perfectly with the rule of thirds chart on there. So it just kind of adds or strikes a point that not only does our photography that we're taking and any images that we see in the future have that, but things like TV are going to do something similar to that kind of style too. This, I think, is one of the last details. I might have 1 or 2 more things on here, and then I talk a little bit about content creation, and then we'll be done for the class tonight. Sun on your back. That first image we saw of the surfer dude where his sun was coming down and he had a really nice harsh shadow on him was nice because it offered the sky, the water, the shiny sand to have a lot of color, reflection, look cool. In this case though, if we're trying to show off maybe a friend or a kid or our husband, or whoever it is, having the sun behind us and not opening our body up to it prevents us from getting a lot of features shown. In this case, you got a fish. A fish is slimy, it's gross, but one of the things that make fish unique is the fact that they have a lot of shiny scales on them, and so they're a natural light reflector. So if we have light coming through and we're bottling ourselves up with the little fish in front of our head, light's behind our back, we're not letting anything come through. If we could just open ourselves up a little bit, move the fish, in this case away from his face, kind of move his head off to the side, hat cocked up a little bit more, we've added more light to the image, and now we're just making things look more open and friendly. Things like exposure compensation can help with this kind of thing too. Things like playing with your ISO can help with these things too. But something just as simple as opening ourselves up to what's available. The sun is always going to be your best friend. It's easy for us to make a photo darker than it is to make it lighter. So in the future, if they wanted to lighten this one up, they would lighten everything up. The sky would become extremely bright and washed out, and we really would have just an ugly photo. But just that simple movement adds enough light that if we want to tweak things later on, we can. Last thing, use your timer, use your camera app. I think I talked about it a little bit before. Almost every camera that's new or modern, say made within the last 15 years, has a Wi-Fi Bluetooth connection, so you can use your devices and your products that you already have, connect with them, and then start putting photos or anything else on there. Great feature to have, really useful. Definitely would recommend it. Timer apps as well too, remote control apps. It's great. This is for content creation. I've noticed that especially in the intro to photography, I got a lot of people that were coming in for a while that were like, hey, I'm trying to start with YouTube, I'm trying to start making music videos for my friends, or I'm just trying to maybe boost my business, and this is what I'm doing. There's a couple things to keep in mind. When I started this class, I was told that two things have to be good, nothing more than that. If anything else is bad, nobody's going to want to watch your video at all. So if you're doing videos, make sure you have proper lenses and proper camera bodies and settings put on there. If you're trying to shoot a video for your friend, or you're trying to take pictures and you're using a really wide lens and you're distorting the way they look, it's probably not going to look really great. If you get a portrait lens so that way you can highlight whatever it is for them, that's probably going to go a long way. If you're moving or you're shaky, make sure you have stabilization. Again, just what we talked about, blurry images and things like that just don't sell very well, and they're also not going to help your business or whatever it is that you're creating content for thrive. Lighting is another big one. Obviously, like I said 2 slides ago, the sun is your best friend, so natural lighting. But studio lighting is a great idea too. They make really nice little block lights for $50-60 that you can throw around if you're trying to light stuff up. On-camera lighting is great. Flashes, light squares, great option too. And microphones. Remember that your camera has a built-in microphone, but it's a lot like TV speakers. For lack of a better term, they suck. So think about a shotgun mic, think about wireless mics, anything that can connect to the camera that'd be an on-camera microphone might be a good idea if you're trying to make a video or do social media or whatever that you're trying to get done. So while getting the camera is great, sometimes we need accessories. Great ways to get into it. They make content creation kits that basically give you everything that you might need, give you a couple of each item. Some will come with the camera themselves. Others will just come with an SD card and maybe a handle grip. Others will come with that handle grip and a microphone on there, so you can just kind of just jump in and get started. So think about it. Whatever you're trying to get into, this might not be a bad idea rather than piecing each individual accessory together. Lastly, if I had to tell you anything in general, I would tell you the top 5 accessories here are the most important things to have. You're buying a camera, you're going to get a strap, but sometimes those straps aren't comfortable. Look into finding padded ones or interchangeable straps. I buy the Peak Design straps for myself. They have a quick release so that I can switch between all my cameras. So I don't have 9 straps. I have 2 straps, and I have little individual clip-ons that it just snaps right on. Get a lens cleaning kit. Never, please, for all that's worth, if I could teach anything, don't use your sweater or your t-shirt to clean your lenses. That leads to micro scratches that can form on there, and over time what you'll notice, and I'm not saying it'll be in a month, but maybe 2-3 years down the road, you keep scrubbing with your sweater or your jacket or your shirt, and eventually that autofocus your camera does really well just doesn't work as well. You think it might be the camera, but in the reality of it, it might be the lens, because you've scratched the lens enough times on there that now it just can't lock in on certain details. Extra memory card, extra battery, just like I said in the very beginning of class, those two are really, really necessary. And the last thing is a bag. I mean, if you're buying a new camera or you already have a camera, you might have spent $300, $400, but you also might have just spent $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. Protect your gear. You invest a lot of money and time into that. Don't let it, get broken. Don't leave it to chance. I'm one of the worst when I travel somewhere. If I'm going to another country or another state, because I'm always taking pictures, I keep the camera around my neck at all times. I think if that's the exception to the rule, if you're going to keep that sucker with you everywhere you go, sure, invest in the bag later on. But when I'm going on to go do a shoot, or I'm going out to actually do a project for something, I have 2 different bags. I have a hard case, and I have a backpack that stores about 3 different camera bodies, 5 lenses, and a drone. So get what's appropriate for you. We sell bags. They sell them online. They sell really cool bags on Etsy where people are hand sewing them with leather. There's all sorts of stuff. Get whatever matches your aesthetic, but protect your gear. Eventually, get that tripod. If you're feeling like you're shaky, it's not a bad investment. External hard drives if you don't like using the cloud-based solutions. Filters, those are really important and really cool. I can talk your ear off about filters, but just a standard UV filter to protect the front of your lens is a great idea. Never mind even polarizing or neutral density or variable density or colored filters or all sorts of different stuff that are out there. Additional lenses, I think those come with time. Start with the kit lens, start with whatever you have, and then figure it out. Do I need more zoom? Do I need a wider angle? Do I need something that blurs my background better? There's all sorts of different lenses out there. Every lens has different purposes. Figure out what you're looking to get, and then that'll kind of tell you what lenses are available for that. And then classes and workshops. This is great. I'm glad to have you guys here today. I hope some of this was helpful, if not all of it. But my one big tidbit is that you should be a forever student when it comes to photography. You don't know it all. I don't know it all. So there's constantly things that we can look up and improve on and keep getting better and better with it. If I had any recommendation, if you got a local group in your neighborhood or a bunch of friends that like to take pictures, hang out with them. Take the camera with you when you go places. I joke, sometimes I'll leave a certain event and I'll have the camera with me, and I don't want to leave it in the car when I go grocery shopping, so I'll bring it in the grocery store with me. And I like the way boxes are organized on shelves. I think it's really cool how they lay products out. So I'll sometimes sit there and just snap a couple pictures. Is it stupid looking? Maybe, but I don't really care. And workshops, anything that you can do to keep yourself learning and playing with the camera, I think it's really helpful. So continue being a forever student. That's the only other thing I can really bestow upon you. And the last thing I have, I think this is the last slide, the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of a low price is forgotten. It's one of my favorite Benjamin Franklin quotes, and I think it works perfect for this. Get a deal on stuff that you really want. Like, don't ever question that. Of course, go for the floor model, go for the used gear if it's what you need. But just because you see something's at a really low price compared to maybe what you were originally looking at, keep in mind that that good price is great. But if it leads to bad quality and you never pick that thing up again, like a lens or a microphone or even a camera, what was it really worth? So, other than that, that's all I got for you. So intermediate classes next Thursday, same thing, 5:30 to 7. This is probably the longest class out of there. I try to do about an hour and then make the last 30 minutes questions. So sorry I kept you guys a little later than I wanted to. But next Thursday, we're going to be talking about things like our manual controls. We're going to start talking about things like lenses and what focal length means, compression, distortion on lenses. If you don't have questions for me tonight or anything like that, or if you do and you don't feel comfortable talking about them right now or you got to head out, take a picture. That's my phone number, email. I'll answer your call. If I don't, just leave me a voicemail. But email me anytime. Send me pictures that you took. I can maybe talk to you a little bit about that. If you got questions on your camera model, If I can't answer it, I can find you 9 YouTube videos to answer it. So, again, I love pictures. I like taking pictures, so I'm here to help however I can.
Well, you know, when I got this camera, it came with this plastic thing.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, it comes out.
lens hood.
Yeah, but what is that for?
So depending on your lens style, when you're taking photos, sometimes what'll happen is that light can hit it from a certain angle, and that's going to cause light flares. And it might not be noticeable right away, but like let's say you're taking a picture on a real bright sunny day, you get reflection coming off a pond. That might give you like this micro line of light that cuts through the camera, and it'll just distort the image slightly. So you put that lens hood on, and it should block out bad light coming from the sides.
Seems like a waste, I think.
I would say that they're definitely not a waste, but it really depends on when you. Anytime, folks. Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
It depends on when you need it. If you don't
Yeah,
feel
I
like
mean-
you need it, don't worry about it. But
Sometimes you want instantaneous pictures. And
Oh,
they,
yeah.
You know, it's like,
yeah,
Does
so,
this one have a drive, I didn't see a drive mode button on this, unless I'm looking at it.
so let's take a look at this guy. Sometimes they're in different spots.
And this is something else that doesn't,
Right up here.
Oh,
So
yeah,
yours
yeah,
is this little guy right there. So the way that you'll access that, hold this down,
Yeah, I
and
see.
you can then
Got it,
switch.
got it.
So there's your timer. That's going to be your continuous low, so low speed, continuous high speed, and they've got a few other ones.
and it's on single.
Thanks for coming in, guys. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
Anytime.
Thank you.
You know, you were talking filters.
Yeah.
Is there a company named Koken that's still in, are they still in business?
The name is. I've heard the name. I personally have not bought one from them, but I know I've heard the name.
I must have 25 or 30 of their filters. I mean,
Really?
they do everything from the Starburst ones to
Yeah.
the sunsets,
Yeah.
sunrise, and all the different. I mean, you could go on vacation in the Caribbean if you're on a cloudy day. You take a picture
Yeah.
and it looks like an unbelievable
I was
sunset.
looking to buy one for the Eclipse.
Yeah,
But, you know, I was like, I didn't know what size to buy.
we had so many calls. Easiest way to determine your size too. So if we flip this guy over, move this, there should be a thing on here.
Yeah, this thing, I don't think, those are all, they're
On
all
your lens cap.
52s. I don't think a
62.
52s.
60
I don't think
millimeter.
62 millimeter.
All right.
Yeah, I don't
And
think.
what's your YouTube channel?
It's Apple Electronics. So it's
Yeah.
the ABT Electronics. It'll pop up right away.
Oh, okay,
I'll
cool.
throw
All right,
this
thanks.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for coming in.
I
Glad to see you.
I like the new phone,
52,
too.
and I think this is bigger than that.
Though, so it won't ever tell you there. It's always going to tell you on the lens because the lenses will always change the diameter size.
That's probably 62.
Let's see. Yours doesn't say it either right there. Maybe a little too. 67.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so
The
67.
circle with a little line going through it, that's the diameter.
Okay, perfect. And just one other quick thing.
Take it to no
that-
rush.
What was the type of card that you were supposed to?
SDXC.
SDXC.
Now for your camera, because it's a little older, you can get away with the SDHC cards. You don't have to worry about getting that fancier card because you're not really doing video on that camera.
Now this one has two, I have one card in there right now, but
Yeah.
this camera has a slot for two.
It's not a bad idea to put 2 in there. There's 2 reasons why you might want to do 2. One is you're a professional photographer and you're going to burn through the first card real fast. You're going to need more room on the second. Option 2 is that if you ever want to get into photo editing, for example, but let's say you don't know if you want to edit. Some people are like, I want the option. What you can do is you can do it where it takes both JPEG and RAW. What'll happen is that takes up a lot of space on there. Your RAW is what you use to edit on the computer. Your JPEG is the photo that you can email to friends or put on a printout, do all that other stuff with. But if you're not sure yet, you can do both at the same time. That'll take a lot of space. And so, but why that's nice is because then it'll save both card slots individually.
I don't think those cards are really expensive, so.
No, they're really not. You can get some decent ones, especially if you're not doing video. You don't need a high speed, but yeah, you can do whatever you need.
All right, thanks a lot.
Great seeing you.
Hopefully I can
Thanks.
make it for the meeting.
Please do. If you can't, don't worry about it. I'll be around. Come in any day. Tuesday, Wednesdays are the only days off. So come in any other day.
Thank you.
Anytime. All right. For those watching online, I don't see any questions right now. We're at the 7 o'clock mark. So I'm going to let you guys go. If anybody has any questions for me in the future or anything that you want answered, sooner than later, email, call me anytime that you want. I'm available. Other than Tuesday, Wednesdays, you'll see me here. And as always, guys, thanks for participating. Thanks for coming in for the video class. Had a lot of people in class today in person, so it's always good to see. Keep shooting, stay active out there, and